achando que nós ficamos ofendidos com isso. Nós não ficamos ofendidos. Nós ficaríamos ofendidos. Nós ficaríamos ofendidos se nos chamasse de nazista, de neofascista, de terrorista, mas de comunista, de socialista, nunca. Isso não nos ofende, isso nos orgulha, muitas vezes. E muitas vezes nós sabemos que merecemos esse ataque.
All right. Listen to the round of applause that Lula got there, explicitly embracing the label of socialist and communist, saying that we're not offended by this label. We would be offended if you called us neo-fascists or fascistas. So yeah, pretty cool to see him embracing his socialist communist roots there. This comment, though, this cracked me up. This made me laugh out loud. Is Bolsonaro going to the Lula? I wish, last time I checked, though, Bolsonaro was in Miami, the home of all U.S.-backed or Western finance capital-backed world leaders, neo-fascistic or straight-up fascistic leaders like Jair Bolsonaro, who only came to power by jailing Lula, or having Judge Sergio Moro throw Lula in jail, Judge Sergio Moro was then appointed to the Bolsonaro administration. Isn't that convenient? But now Lula's back in power, he's back in office, and instead of a neo-fascist president saying racist, bigoted, right-wing things, for lack of a better descriptor, we have Lula embracing socialism and communism, and the Brazilian people cheering him on. So great stuff to see. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on our show. We've also got a whole bunch of things planned out. Going to talk about what's going on in France a little bit. Going to talk about Matt Taibbi and the Twitter files. We're going to break down a video of Fareed Zakaria, CNN propagandist, talking about Russia and making this absurd economic argument. And perhaps we'll talk about this video called Why America is So Obsessed with Communism. But part of me wants to wait till we have Carlos with us to break that one down. But either way, after we play our sweet intro and listen to the international here, we'll get right into it. What is up, everybody? I see some of you have already noticed the new background. That's right, I'm in a completely new location. Same city, same state, same year, new me. Just kidding. Same me, but different room, different house. So hopefully you all like the background. Let me know if there's anything I should change. I'm thinking about just hanging up a Midwestern Marks banner back there. But for now, this works. This works. If I were to go up here a little bit, you can see my Che Guevara clock right next to my face. So maybe that should be the background of the streams. But either way, we've been following Matt Taibbi A little bit, and the Twitter files a little bit, but not as closely as we've been following, say, Julian Assange. But there's a lot of parallels at this point. Obviously, Matt Taibbi's still free. He's not locked up, being held in solitary confinement, waiting to be extradited to the United States, where he'll likely be locked up for the rest of his life, the way Julian Assange is. But Matt Taibbi is now reporting to Chris Hedges, or Chris Hedges is now reporting about Matt Taibbi that he's being targeted by intelligence agencies, that he's being targeted by the U.S. ruling class. So we recently had friend of the show, Tara Reid, who was actually forced to flee to Russia, seek asylum in Russia because she was being targeted by U.S. intelligence agencies. And Matt Gaetz told her, Tara, you're being targeted by these Western intelligence folks. You probably want to do something for your own safety. So she fled. Now they're looking at Taibbi for the information he revealed, with which Chris Hedges will expertly break down in this. He's been following it very closely, as well as the Assange case. But I figured it was worth doing a deep dive on this show since, like I said, we haven't been covering the Taibbi case as close as the Assange case. I want all of y'all, the audience, to be caught up on what's going on with Matt Taibbi, what he revealed, because there's a whole lot of disinformation coming out about it right now from the news outlets and from the Democratic Party that is constantly accusing other people in other countries of spreading disinformation. But obviously they're going to cover this story in a way that makes Matt Taibbi look really bad, makes him look like a criminal, justifies any kind of legal action against him. So it's important to be aware of what's going on with this story, because it's a really important story in the U.S. right now. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Chris Hedges on the Real News Network. I believe that's the name of this channel, because Chris Hedges actually had his previous YouTube channel completely wiped out, similar to our 7 TikTok accounts that were wiped out. So
the journalist Matt Taibbi has been targeted by the Democratic Party for exposing extensive government blacklists used to censor left-wing and right-wing critics. Given access to the internal traffic of Twitter by Twitter's new owner, Elon Musk, he documented repeated cases where the FBI and other government agencies repeatedly suppressed news and commentary.
And one of the things they keep doing is being like, oh, he got it from Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a capitalist, oligarch, right-winger. Therefore, this information is invalid, and Matt Taibbi is a terrible right-winger who needs to be thrown in jail. It's like, just because he got information from someone you don't like doesn't mean that it's useless information. Like, come on, that's the immaturity of that. If Elon Musk, obviously I don't like Elon Musk. 99% of the content I made about Elon Musk has been negative, about who he's a fraudster. But if he's going to give us access to Twitter and let us look behind the scenes, why would we not take advantage of that? It's like when Colonel Douglas McGregor or Scott Ritter or these people who were inside the State Department or the UN or inside the apparatuses of U.S. ruling class power come out and start telling us stuff about them. You have these purists like the Vanguard, this YouTube channel called the Vanguard, who will attack the Gray Zone guys for interviewing them. Like, why are you interviewing these guys? These are bad guys. These guys are part of the Pentagon and the U.S. military. Like, yeah, and they're telling us the Pentagon's secrets. Why would we not listen to them and then use that strategically? Use that to share with the American public and show them what the Pentagon's doing with your damn tax dollars. Like, think strategically. Don't think in terms of good guys and bad guys. That's liberal comic book thinking.
Censored content was almost exclusively produced by those critical of the dominant narrative advanced by the Democratic Party and the old establishment wing of the Republican Party, which has joined forces with the Democrats. Threads that were censored include those from the Yellow Vest movement, activists from the Occupy movement, Global Revolution Live, negative stories about Joe Biden, reports on a Ukrainian energy company, Burisma, that paid Hunter Biden about $1 million a year while his father was vice president, positive stories about Venezuela.
The Hunter Biden story, too, I've seen so many leftists who refuse to touch it because CNN put out so much and MSNBC put out so much propaganda about it. Like, Joe Biden was one of the architects of the crime bill. right? He was giving speeches on the Senate floor about how nonviolent drug offenders are criminals and we need to get them off the streets before they come for me and your family. We need harsher sentences. We need to fill up the prisons. Meanwhile, his son is literally doing crack cocaine that he never gets in trouble for, that he only ever has to go to expensive, rehabilitation facilities for that are more like a vacation than anything. He's getting all this money through corruption and sitting on the boards of these energy firms because his dad's Joe Biden. And Joe Biden's giving speeches on the Senate floor about locking up poor nonviolent drug offenders. So the hypocrisy is insane, and we should be pointing that out. Anyone who calls himself a socialist or a leftist or a communist should be pointing out that, the head of the country has been arguing to lock up poor people for nonviolent drug offenses while his son is off doing drugs and getting away scot-free. But no, because it helps Trump. We just have to ignore it and pretend that it's a conspiracy theory. It's not. It's not. You can look up the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop right now. It's not a conspiracy.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro reports about Ukrainian human rights abuses and details of the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop. The accounts were flagged and usually disappeared. The so-called quote-unquote moderation requests were sent by an entity called the Foreign Influence Task Force. The Foreign Influence Task Force is an FBI-led interagency task force that includes numerous government agencies, including Homeland Security, the CIA, the Pentagon, and the State Department. It flags what it considers objectionable content for about 24 social media companies, including Twitter, Facebook, Google, Pinterest, and Wikimedia. In March, Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger were called to testify before the Select Subcommittee on Weaponization of the Federal Government. While Taibbi was testifying on March 9th, an IRS agent visited his house in New Jersey. Taibbi discovered that the IRS opened a case against him on the day he published a Christmas Eve Twitter thread.
And do you remember? A lot of you probably don't remember, because I'm sure a lot of you don't spend too much time on the cesspool that is TikTok. But when Joe Biden increased the number of IRS agents by like 50,000 or whatever, some insane number, I'm like, this is not a good thing. There were left-wingers, social democrats, rad libs cheering it on. Like, yes, now we'll be able to tax the rich. Joe Biden's not using those IRS agents to tax the rich. The rich own him. He's a puppet of the rich. He's going to use those IRS agents to nickel and dime us, to crack down on us. And I said this, and a bunch of rad libs got so mad at me. No, Biden's doing this to target only the rich people, because that was the problem. We didn't have enough IRS agents. We needed 50,000 more. Now they'll tax the rich. It's not because of tax loopholes designed by the rich who own the government through lobbying and campaign donations. Like, how naive. It just shows that some people don't know how capitalism works, and some people don't know how the ruling economic class, or how deeply the ruling economic class actually controls our political system and actually controls these politicians like Joe Biden, despite their pro-working class rhetoric from time to time. Thank you so much, Battle Cossack. $100 super chat from Argentina. Really appreciate that. Appreciate you supporting the show. Appreciate you supporting our survival. Biden wants to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. What's next? White phosphorus? Are you kidding me? He does? And how many times has the U.S. dropped cluster bombs on countries now, even though it's been declared a war crime, even though you're not supposed to do it? I'm pretty sure they dropped cluster bombs on Yugoslavia as well. Yeah, I have a personal story about white phosphorus. So someone I know in the military showed me a video of his unit hitting a civilian with white phosphorus, which apparently the U.S. government, U.S. military doesn't use. So apparently that video was staged. My friend just made it up. But thank you so much for the super chat, Cossack.
From a letter House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan sent to the IRS Commissioner inquiring about Taibbi's case. It was a Saturday. It was Christmas Eve. Taibbi did not owe taxes. The case was 4 years old. All this suggests that the IRS case was politically motivated and the FBI was monitoring Taibbi. Taibbi ran into the buzzsaw of orchestrated character assassination when he testified. The Democratic members of the committee rarely let Taibbi speak. They delivered...
They're still finding unexploded cluster bombs in former Yugoslavia. This is true of Laos as well. Actually, Laos is the most bombed country on earth, and a third of the cluster bombs they dropped on Laos didn't detonate. So they're still just sitting in the soil to this day. And since the bombing stopped in the late 70s, or maybe not late 70s, but 70s, There have been over 1,000 Laotian people killed by bombs because they're farming, they're working out in the fields, and they come across one of these things and they explode on them.
Vicious and insulting diatribes, which were then broadcast on outlets such as MSNBC and CNN, part of the effort to further discredit him. The ranking committee member, Stacey Plaskett, sent Taibbi a letter accusing him of lying to Congress and threatened Taibbi with a 5-year prison sentence. Joining me to discuss this wholesale censorship and the efforts by the ruling establishment, especially the Democratic Party, to discredit him and his work is Matt Taibbi. Matt, let's go back to December 24th, 2022. You're in the Park 55 Hotel in San Francisco, and explain what you're doing.
Well, I was putting together the final touches on a story about, it was going to be called Twitter and Other Government Agencies. About a week and a half into the Twitter Files project, we found a series of documents that had come to Twitter through the Foreign Influence Task Force. And it was basically just a pile of reports that came from various government agencies. Sometimes we could tell which ones they were, sometimes not. But in essence, most of them were simply, a few paragraphs of text along with a gigantic Excel spreadsheet of account names. And they would say things like, we assess that the following are related to Russia's Internet Research Agency or are working to further anti-Ukraine objectives or whatever. And, we would check and see that sometimes all of the accounts were gone. Sometimes it was a percentage of them. But in most cases, there was some kind of action. And, this was an important story that we put out. I was very nervous.
So for those who don't know, this is what happened to us at TikTok. We had an account with almost 400,000 followers. We were sharing, our position on the war in Ukraine, which is that it's a NATO-led proxy war, that NATO, pushed us into this situation, showing evidence of the coup in 2014. And our account got removed. It got removed after TikTok was taken over, or at least the U.S. servers were taken over by Oracle, this company with deep ties to the CIA, who then hired a bunch of State Department and NATO officials to manage their content. So they promptly removed 300,000 accounts, which they just said were connected to Russia, right? And TikTok, like Twitter, has gotten a lot of attention because of Taibbi, and Mint Press News has been covering the TikTok thing, but it's kind of gone overlooked because I think people laugh at it like, TikTok, the kids' dancing app. But there were so many accounts like ours, explicitly Marxist accounts, anti-imperialist accounts, socialist accounts, breaking stuff down with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers. There are so many of us. And they just wiped them all off the face of the earth. Not only, stopped us from posting, but wiped out all of our past content. And 300,000 accounts they wiped out and just said they were connected to Russia, shrugged their shoulders and said, yeah, they're Russian accounts. None of them were. Our account got banned. Obviously, we're based in the Midwest, no connection to Russia. My buddy Commie Trucker had his account banned. He's literally a trucker in Iowa. A collective account called the Vanguard of Marxists. Anybody telling about the truth about Ukraine was removed for being a Russian bot or whatever. And these liberal accounts, including ones that were actively doxing people and sharing their phone numbers and calling for people to be fired, calling for campaigns to call people or contact people's employers and get them fired if they wouldn't, put a Ukraine flag in their bio and go, you rah rah NATO. Those accounts were boosted, and those accounts are still up to this day for the most part. So just blatant censorship, and the only explanation that they ever feel that they have to give is, oh, these are Russian accounts, Russian misinformation. When the studies show that there are far more Ukrainian bot accounts and Ukrainian misinformation accounts than there are Russian accounts by a long shot. Where was the banning of 300,000 Ukrainian bot accounts, TikTok?
About it. It included information about the CIA, the DNI, Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and that's what I was preparing to do on Christmas Eve.
And we should be clear that before you made this release on December 24th, the FBI had already denounced your work on the Twitter files, saying it was the product of conspiracy theorists. This is their quoting them, who fed the public, quote, misinformation, whose sole purpose was discrediting.
That's the other thing they got. You're a Russian agent. You're a conspiracy theorist. How? Well, we don't have to get into that, but you are, and you're banned.
The agency.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I even referenced the FBI's quote in the beginning of the thread. Sort of sarcastically, I said, of course, my sole purpose isn't discrediting the FBI. There are other agencies I want to discredit as well. And the idea of that was to, among other things, make the public aware that the FBI had commented on the story, in a way that I think was intended to intimidate a little bit, in addition to not answering, the questions that we sent. But yes, they had already made it known that they were paying attention to the story, and that was unnerving certainly on one level.
Let's talk about the Foreign Influence Task Force. You said you estimated it as a staff of about 80. What is it? Who's on it? To the extent that you know, when was it set up, and how does it work?
I don't know a whole lot about when it was set up. Other reporters have done some work on that. Lee Fong.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael S., for the super chat. Second super chat of the day. Really appreciate you all. And as I said, these are instrumental to everything that we do at the Institute. I saw one of Carlos's talks recently where he said Russia wasn't working as an imperialist power, but they are capitalist and have motives that are not just to denazify Ukraine, but also are for economic reasons as well. I think we've been clear about this since the beginning. Like, it doesn't hurt Russia economically to control the Donbass and Crimea, right? There are economic motivations there, but there's, a reason that Crimea was given to Ukraine by the USSR as a gift back in the day, and why it was never taken back by Russia, even though in 1991 the Crimeans voted that they wanted to either become independent or join Russia. They wanted to leave Ukraine, which is a little known fact. But Russia didn't move to take it back until the 2014 coup, until NATO expansion into Ukraine started happening, until the NATO training and arming of troops in Ukraine started happening. And of course, the special military operation and the seizure or annexation or independence, you could even liberation of the Donbass regions who voted to join Russia, doesn't happen until much later, 2022, with the special military operation. So clearly these economic incentives weren't the driving force of the intervention, right? The driving force of Russia's special military operation, the main thing that made them do it was security concerns, was the NATO expansion that they saw as an existential threat to the Russian state if Ukraine were to join NATO. While there are economic factors and incentives that can be observed, you can't say Russia's acting as an imperialist power because they're not doing this to, seize those economic objectives and control those sources of production. The reason they're pursuing a special military operation is to defend their country's national security from the advancing imperialist apparatus of NATO. I believe that's Carlos's position as well. But thank you so much for the super chat and the solid question. Thank you.
Who's one of the Twitter Files reporters, had done some work on it. He was where we got the number 80 for staff for the FI.
I fully support Russia. Sorry, I just want to answer this because it's a good question. I fully support Russia assisting Eastern Ukraine. But why invade the rest of Ukraine? Well, because NATO has prevented any kind of peace deal, right? So Russia could liberate just Eastern Ukraine, but then those homes are still going to be shelled, right? There's still going to be artillery in the hands of fascists and neo-fascists in Ukraine, firing on the people of the Donbass, destroying their homes, and the fighting is going to continue. The warfare and bloodshed is going to continue. Ukraine's going to try and take these territories back, like what they're doing with their counteroffensive. Right, this stuff is going to continue to happen because NATO and the UN are blocking any attempt at a peace deal, as we've seen from recent reports from People's Dispatch and elsewhere. Anytime there's an attempt to make a peace agreement between Putin and Zelensky, NATO or the UN swoops in to break it up and say, no, we have to keep fighting down to the last Ukrainian. So the fighting continues, and Russia, has no option except for demilitarization and denazification, which they've said since the beginning. And, the longer this war goes on, the more likely it is that Russia will have to go all the way to Kiev and topple the Zelensky regime, right? If the fighting continues, if they can't sign a peace deal, if the U.S. won't let Ukraine sign a peace deal that says, fine, you get Crimea and the Donbass, but the fighting stops then, which is what Russia wants and what they've proposed like 3 times now. If Ukraine doesn't do that, then the fighting's going to continue and Russia's hand will be forced until they have to topple the regime. And then that'll just, that'll be the end of it then. And I don't know what'll happen. Maybe all of Ukraine gets absorbed into Russia. It'll be interesting to see, but that's why it's so imperative if you're in Europe or in the US to not buy the NATO line on this and push for a peace deal, right? By pushing for peace and for pushing to an end of the war where, Russia is going to receive the Donbass and Crimea, you're not being anti-Ukrainian, right? You're being pro-NATO. The pro-Ukrainian civilian position is to advocate for a peace deal, right? Because right now NATO is trying to push Ukrainians at gunpoint into the Russian meat grinder, the Russian military. That is not pro-Ukraine. So thank you for the insightful questions, Michael. I should probably get back to this, though. We're a little bit off track.
ATF. As far as we could determine, it was mostly comprised of FBI, Homeland Security, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The FITF essentially became like the throughway junction for government requests for content moderation. And the system they worked out was basically requests that came from the federal government would come through the FBI, and anything that came up through the states would come through DHS. And they had a very specific means of doing that. They had basically a communications platform they called Teleporter. It was like a one-way door. It was a little bit like Mission Impossible. Like there was a way to rig it so that once content went through there, it wouldn't last very long. It would delete after a period of time. But we recovered some of the stuff that was in there. But that's what the FITF does. And what's interesting about it, there are two things that are interesting. One, it claims that it's only monitoring foreign material, but we found ample evidence of them looking even at the accounts of very small, following American domestic account holders. And the other thing is, these are not personnel that are trying to make cases. They're just monitoring social media. It's FBI agents who, they're not trying to put together something for trial. They're just watching.
They're not producing evidence.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're not compiling anything toward any kind of case. Yeah.
Which is exactly how in the McCarthy era, the FBI worked. They show up even at high schools. Elaine Schrecker's written about this with a list. There was no evidence. There was a list of names, and all of those teachers were gone. And not only were they gone, they were blacklisted.
Well, right. And that's one of the reasons why the church committee, one of the major reforms that came out of the church committee was a change in the whole idea of what the FBI would do. They had to have some kind of predicate to initiate an investigation.
Well, NATO and the State Department have been talking about this new Cold War with Russia and China, right? They want to revamp the Cold War. Why would they not revamp the Red Scare? Why not revamp McCarthyism, right? If you're going to try and lie the entire country into just holding this deep-seated hatred for countries in the East, for communist socialist countries trying to create a different economic system than us. If you're going to try and instill that in your people, you have to censor people who are giving an alternative narrative, censor people who are critical of your narrative, and boost shills like Philip DeFranco, former YouTuber turned puppet of the U.S. State Department and NATO. You got to boost people like that who are going to brainwash kids with pro-NATO propaganda on TikTok and YouTube.
We don't have that anymore.
It really is like they saw Midwestern Marks getting big on TikTok. They saw us almost hitting 400,000 followers, and they're like, oh, shoot, tag in Philip DeFranco. Tell him to start being just an absolute NATO shill. We'll boost his account, and then we'll start banning this Midwestern Marks guy. And we'll replace all this viral anti-imperialist content with the most pro-imperialist pseudo-intellectual dribble you could absolutely imagine, which is the kind of content that Philip DeFranco produces. And there you go. You'll have a generation, or we won't have a generation of kids who are socialist and anti-imperialist. We'll start pushing them towards supporting imperialism or woke imperialism or whatever it may be.
They started to make that change right around 2000.
All right, woke imperialism in itself is a strategy for bringing kids in, kids on TikTok who consider themselves radical, who want to change the society that we're in. But then the CIA will do commercials like, look how diverse we are, and we support mental health and racial and sexual diversity, to try and trick radical-leaning, left-leaning kids into supporting the CIA, an arm of imperialism controlled by finance capital.
2008 or so, but now it's firmly entrenched that the FBI is essentially a counterintelligence operation that has a criminal division to it. It's in the intelligence gathering business as much as it is the case making business.
So the FITF has an industry meeting. Explain what that is, and you had told me that at first it was monthly and then it was weekly as the 2020 election approached.
So the moment that I think was the light bulb moment for a lot of us on the Twitter file story was when we first found emails that talked about what you refer to the industry meeting, and you would see something would be forwarded to one of the members of Twitter's trust and safety department, and there would be an agenda, and it would come from the FITF. And you would see the agenda for what they call the industry meeting, and there would be all these people would be CC'd on the email. It would be probably 24 companies or more, and it would say something like OGA briefing (parentheses Ukraine). Right, so that would be at the top. And OGA, as you know, is usually a euphemism, either intelligence generally or the CIA specifically. We had emails that showed that the CIA attended a couple of these meetings, that they asked to be there. So we thought that was pretty damning stuff, because among other things, not only did it show that all of these companies were in regular contact with federal enforcement agencies, but that there was this rather elaborate anti-competitive situation going on that, I don't think anybody's even thought about that angle of it. The antitrust component of this, where you have 20 or 25 tech companies getting together and making secret agreements on what kind of content they're going to show the public. I think that's very serious. And it was all basically in one email, so that was what that was the kind of thing where you could show the public one picture and it would be powerful that way.
Is there any indication that they were producing content?
No, although we did have some indication from a couple of sources, and we were never able to really report this, but we heard it from enough people that I think it's worth mentioning that there were some indications that the government had some input into the drafting of the terms of service of some of these companies. Right, so we would see that the FBI was assigning lots of people to monitor different communications for possible violations of terms of service. And we even saw Twitter personnel complaining about that. One of the lawyers is saying, my God, it's like they're entering search terms looking for.
So extensive infiltration of Twitter by the intelligence agencies. Of course, that leads to censorship. And I want to show you all quickly my evidence for the similar infiltration of TikTok that is very similar to what Taibbi is describing there with Twitter. Obviously, we don't have the TikTok files yet, but I was one of the accounts that got banned in this TikTok purge. But of course, TikTok was controlled by ByteDance, this Singapore-based company that the West has claimed is a Chinese-based company for some reason. I mean, not for some reason, because they have to fearmonger about China. But anyways, when the algorithm was controlled by ByteDance, it was much better. Anybody could go viral, right? Literally anybody could go viral. Our videos would go viral all the time, and they still do, but it's more of a certain kind of video now. Back in the day, like anything could go viral. You could just make a video talking about how the U.S. put Augusto Pinochet in power and overthrew Salvador Allende. It'd get like 100,000 likes. So that kind of content was getting really, really popular, like actually radical, actually anti-imperialist content. So that's when Trump started threatening to ban TikTok, right? And when that was happening, I'm like, ooh, they're trying to censor all the anti-imperialist rhetoric that's going on this app, the anti-imperialist information that's being shared by the younger generation here. But instead of banning TikTok, what they did was force TikTok to hand over control of their US-based servers, their Western servers, to Oracle, this company with deep ties to the CIA that's based in Texas. And what Oracle immediately did was hire a bunch of national security agents and NATO operatives who banned 300,000 accounts for being connected to Russia. Let me see if I can find it. 320,000 Russian accounts were removed, and over 41,000 videos peddling misinformation about the war. So they hired a bunch of NATO operatives and wiped the app of content that was critical of NATO and people who were critical of NATO. This is deep, deep infiltration by the State Department and by NATO. And blatant censorship, blatant violation of freedom of speech. You can't even say that it's a private company doing it, so therefore it's okay, right? That's the argument that the ANCAPs will make. Oh, Twitter and Facebook should be allowed to censor you because they're private companies. Well, they're being pressured to by the intelligence agencies. They're hiring government officials, or State Department and NATO officials. So it's the government too. The private companies, the private corporations are just happy to go along with them for the most part. And ASPI, of course, is one of the main imperialist think tanks driving policy between the US, Australia, and UK right now. Their AUKUS alliance. But then every time you hear the government talk about, Chinese misinformation that's being spread through TikTok, it's complete nonsense. What they're talking about is people like Midwestern Marx who are sharing the reality of what the US government is doing with people and with kids. So they say China's spreading this misinformation. They're controlling us. We need to crack down. We need to crack down on TikTok. We need to get them to hire more CIA officials. We need more government regulation. We need more censorship of speech, to the point where the app, I still use it. It's still a good tool for drawing people into our content, but it's nothing like what it used to be. Everybody who's on TikTok now recognizes it's so easy to get banned on the app. It's like walking on eggshells all the time. And then that's because it's controlled by State Department officials. Literally. So yeah, I've tried to get like Jimmy Dore to pick this story up. I've tried really hard to get Jimmy to pick it up. I've tried really hard to get a lot of mainstream, quote unquote, internet news shows, internet commentators to pick up this story about TikTok and then interview us so we can be like, yeah, we had 400,000 followers on this app and they just wiped it all out. Because if the Twitter files are such a big deal, obviously what Matt Taibbi revealed is pretty extensive, but if censorship on Twitter is a big deal, censorship on TikTok's a big deal too. It's just harder to get traction because I feel like, I don't think Jimmy Dore really knows what TikTok is that much. He certainly doesn't use it a lot. The only time he reacts to TikToks are probably just when his producers hand TikToks to him. But, a lot of these older journalists use Twitter to share information with each other and stay up to date. So, and by older, I don't mean really old, but older than I. I'm just a young buck in this game. Not a game. $10 super chat from our boy Kyle Pettis, the trucker, organizer, and researcher extraordinaire. Thank you, Kyle. I'm going to hit you up on Discord later today. You'll be seeing an uptick in war propaganda for Ukraine. Graham and Blumenthal just introduced legislation for use of NATO Article 5 if any nuclear event happens in Ukraine. Either tactical nuke or meltdown. Yeah, I've been seeing them push for that lately. Nuclearization of Ukraine. It's like, that's just the worst idea. Like, the Ukrainian government can't tell the truth about anything. It's clearly just this corrupt cesspool running around with U.S. money and guns right now. And we're like, yeah, let's give that country nukes. Let's give them nukes so they can shoot nukes at Russia, who also have nukes. No. How about no? I'll sing it. Yeah. Where did I saw Blumenthal did something recently where Drew Pavlu was calling for him to be locked in jail. That guy is so fucking stupid, dude. Max Blumenthal was like sharing something true, of course, about what was going on, or what's going on in Ukraine. And Drew Pavlu called for him to be locked in jail for it. Let's actually find that. Drew Pavlu is just this kid who's probably connected to the State Department or something. He's quite stupid. All right, where is it? Do you guys know who Drew is? Drew has agreed to debate Noah like 8 times. And then backs out every time. Oh my gosh, this guy tweets so much. These people live on Twitter, dude. Like, stop tweeting. Okay. So he tweeted about 700 times in the past few days. So Drew, if you're watching this, please, for the love of God, go outside. The other day, he told me he's going to catch up to me in my physique. Well, apparently while I was working out this morning, Drew, you were tweeting 700 times. So you're not going to catch up to my physique that way, buddy, old pal. But anyways, American citizen Gonzalo Lira, this is Alex Rubinstein, reporter, has spent the last 60 days in a Ukrainian prison for the crime of criticizing the Zelensky regime, which is true of pretty much all the opposition figures, opposition media, journalists, political parties in Ukraine right now. If you dissent against the regime, you get silenced, shuttered. If you're a media organization, it's shuttered or the government takes control of it, or you get thrown in jail if you're doing independent reporting like Gonzalo Lira was doing, basically just like doing vlogs in his room from Ukraine and explaining what was going on live from Ukraine, which was scary. I mean, he got picked up by the Ukrainian SBU, the secret police, before he got arrested for, the most recent time. Like, geez, dude, get the heck out of Ukraine. But he liked Eastern Europe. But anyways, Drew responded and said, I look forward to the day that Max Blumenthal rots in a prison aside Gonzalo Lira. Like, dude, you're being a bad U.S. propagandist right now. You're making them seem like psychos. You're making it seem like you literally want anybody who's critical of your murderous political positions to be locked in jail for it. And Daniel Dumbrill, one of our heroes, friend of the show, says, this is why people from all sides can appreciate you, Drew. You are one of the most transparent human rights activists around. By becoming a caricature of other supposed freedom fighters, you help people see through the other more nuanced and skilled fake activists far more easily. Oh my gosh, what an own. What an epic own. And everyone who liked this tweet is probably a bot anyways, but it's so true. It's so true. Like, the U.S. is like, and the State Department is like, no, we're not censoring people who are critical of us. We're not censoring anti-imperialist voices and trying to lock them in jail. We're just combating misinformation. We're combating conspiracy theories. We're combating the far right. Right? And then Drew Pavlou is like, nope, we're literally just going to lock up all of my political enemies. We're just locking up anyone who's critical of U.S. power and the proxy war in Ukraine. Like, you're not being a very good propagandist here, Drew. You're saying the quiet part out loud for us.
Why are we doing this? Why are we tempting nuclear annihilation by flooding Ukraine with advanced weapons and sabotaging negotiations at every turn? We've been told by people like Senator Dick Durbin that Ukraine is literally in a battle for freedom and democracy itself. And therefore, anyone who opposes military aid to Ukraine opposes the very defense of democracy, according to this logic. So where's the democracy in Vladimir Zelensky's decision to ban opposition parties, to criminalize the media outlets of his legitimate political opponents, to jail his top political rival and his deputies, to raid Orthodox churches and jail clergymen? Where is the democracy in the Ukrainian government's imprisonment of Gonzalo Lira, an American citizen, simply for challenging the official narrative of Ukraine's war? And where is the democracy in Zelensky's recent decision to suspend elections in 2024 on the grounds that martial law has been declared? The answer is that Ukrainian democracy is harder to find these days than that country's commander-in-chief, Valery Zaluzhny. Why are we doing?
Or, I don't even know if he mentioned the complete banning of communist parties, complete banning of socialist parties. And really of any party even remotely critical of Zelensky. It's just been outright banned. Outright banned. Same with the media outlets that are critical of him. Just shuttered. Seized by the government. Turned into propaganda outlets for the regime. And the Western media is really still calling it a liberal democracy. And people are believing it. I mean, a lot of Americans who only get their media through cable news, are just blinded from these obvious truths, from the fact that Ukraine has even banned all their opposition media and parties. The Western media, as soon as it became convenient to support Ukraine and use them as a proxy against Russia, they stopped reporting on the corruption and neo-Nazism problem in Ukraine. But anyways, it's only gotten worse since the special military operation was launched. It's only gotten more corrupt. It's only gotten more dictatorial. And the Western media just keeps saying it. We got to protect Ukraine because they're a liberal democracy. Okay, you guys. I don't think you know what those words mean. Or you've just given up on the fact that Western liberal democracies are projects that can work. Right? You've given up on the idea that liberal countries can live up to their own ideals of freedom of speech and freedom of the press and political democracy, representative democracy. You've admitted that it doesn't work, right? And that liberal democracy is just a way to describe a capitalist authoritarian dictatorship, a country controlled by finance capital. Because that is what Ukraine is, just like many liberal democracies end up being. You should reach out to Carl Za about Chinese progress in the new Cold War if you guys haven't already. Solidarity. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for the $5 super chat. Sebastian's a constant viewer, very active in the chat, very active in the Midwestern Marks Discord. Which you can join by being a $1 Patreon on the Midwestern Marks Patreon account. If you do that, we let you in for life. We'll never kick you out of the Discord. I'm a big fan of Carl Za. I'm pretty sure he follows us. I'm not sure. I don't want to look it up on stream and embarrass myself if he doesn't. He doesn't. Shit. Why do I even run this institute? We're idiots. Carl Za doesn't even follow us. Just kidding. He doesn't follow us, but I've been a fan of Carl Za forever. I listen to the Silk and Steel podcast often. So it'd be very, very cool to have him on the show. I agree. Thank you so much for the super chat, Sebastian. Yes, Carl is great. He is. He really is. He is fantastic. Let's hit this story real quick because this is pretty quick. Pretty simple story here. Follow up on what we were talking about with nuclear earlier. RFK came out sort of tentatively against nuclear, saying he would be for nuclear if it was more heavily regulated and something else. But then he said that nuclear isn't even that powerful of a source of energy, which we disagreed with, obviously. Listen to Oliver Stone's Nuclear Now, or an interview about his new movie, Nuclear Now, where he explains that the threat of nuclear power has been much overblown. The threat of nuclear waste from it has been much overblown, and the nuclear catastrophes, like what was it? The one in Japan. There's Chernobyl in Russia, and then the nuclear reactor that was crushed by the tsunami in Japan. Either way, it wasn't as devastating as it was portrayed as. It was mostly the tsunami itself that was so devastating. And Fukushima. Yes, thank you all. And then our wonderful, wise, well-educated chat pointed out to me, which is something I didn't know because I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination. But these guys pointed out that thorium powered nuclear energy facilities are much safer than uranium ones and maybe generate less waste. I don't know. I don't want to speculate because, like I said, we're not even close to my area of expertise here. But it's important to understand how energy sources affect the economy and affect production. This is an important thing for a Marxist analysis to be made of, I guess. So you guys informed me that thorium is actually safer than uranium. And now we have this from Dongsheng News. China issues a license for its first thorium reactor, a fuel that could power the country for 20,000 years. That RFK is saying isn't that powerful, or we can't regulate correctly, or whatever. But as we said in the last stream about nuclear, the fact that China is investing in nuclear and looking to go forward with nuclear is a sign that it probably is pretty powerful. or, you know, it is one of the energy sources of the future, or there is a lot of potential to be found in nuclear. China's obviously planning out much of their economy, and they've had much success in doing so over the last 70 years. So the fact that China's investing in this, I think it's definitely something that the U.S. should look into. It's something that socialists should look into and advocate for, right? Both as a way to combat climate change and as just a way to bring jobs and more control of energy production back to the U.S. Can make the point that thorium is better than uranium. And here's a little blurb about the difference between thorium and uranium. Compared to traditional uranium reactors, molten salt thorium reactors are safer, generate less waste, and use fuel more efficiently. Thorium is also a more abundant resource compared to uranium, and China has significant reserves of the metallic element. Ooh, the U.S. is going to be mad. They used to invade countries for oil. Now they're going to start invading countries for thorium. And for nuclear reactors. But this is really interesting. My roommate is gone right now, but the person I just moved in with is an engineer, and they're really into stuff like this. And we were talking about starting like an engineering and socialism podcast where we discuss things like this. So maybe this will be one of the first topics that we discuss. I'll have him talk about what he thinks about nuclear and what he thinks about the difference between thorium and uranium. Quite interessante. Germany has been trying to dismantle a nuclear plant for like 30 years because of a stupid lie. I did not know that. Evil China, evil Greta and her disciples will cry all night long. Are they anti-nuclear, like liberal environmentalists? Because of nuclear waste or what? That's just silliness. Pure silliness. Let's see. We'll check on the Google machine. Greta Thunberg has embraced nuclear power. Will the Greens follow? Looks like Greta's changing her tune if she was anti-nuclear. I'm glad we're following a 19 or 20-year-old girl for everything having to do with the climate. Just kidding. I understand that movements need leaders, but it does seem a little silly. U.S. will invade Chile for lithium. Freaking Boric will probably just give it to him. They're like, don't invade. You guys can have it all. I'm a social democrat. I'm not going to fight you, imperialists. Have my lithium. I'm Gabriel Boric. I love the U.S. Cuba's a dictatorship. I'm Gabriel Boric. I'm a socialist. I'm a good socialist. Maduro's a dictator, and Joe Biden is a good man. I am socialist Gabriel Boric. I'm not a big Boric fan, if you can't tell. I thought that he was becoming part of the sort of lithium OPEC that Bolivia and Mexico are trying to form. But it turns out that Chile, I thought that Boric nationalized Chile's lithium, but one of my comrades from Chile informed me that the lithium industry was already nationalized. And it's highly unlikely that Gabriel Boric will join in this new OPEC, this coalition of lithium producing countries that Lula, AMLO, and Arce in Bolivia and Evo in Bolivia want to form. It'd be like a coalition of lithium producing countries similar to OPEC, which is a coalition of oil producing countries controlled by the US, controlled by the Western finance capital. But this would be controlled by the people in the global south, by sovereign socialistic countries who have these industries nationalized. And I thought Chile was going to be joining in on this, which would be awesome. But again, my comrade in Chile told me that it's highly unlikely and that Boric will probably not join the coalition of lithium producing countries because he is so loyal to the West, because he is so loyal to the US, and because he's denounced all these other socialist countries as dictatorships or whatever. So that's really disappointing. I'm sure Boric's better than whatever far right-wing alternative he was running against in the election, but he ain't no Lula. He ain't even no AMLO. Speak on the Peru coup. AMLO met with Castillo's lawyer 2 days ago, did he? Well, I don't know too much more about it. I didn't even know that. I do know that the coup was perpetrated by the country's oligarchy, who really were blocking Castillo from doing anything when he was in power, from enacting any pro-working class, pro-indigenous reforms. Basically making the country ungovernable by blocking everything, and then using the country's police forces to arrest him after ousting him in a coup. I believe it was an example of lawfare. I believe they used the legal system to ultimately oust him. But it's very clear what faction of Peruvians ousted Castillo. Castillo was from the indigenous rural working class, and the people who ousted him were white, wealthy representatives of the country's oligarchy. So, example of class struggle playing out, coming to a head in politics, and really a victory for the country's oligarchy, backed by Western imperialism, over the forces of the Peruvian working class, the Peruvian indigenous people, the Peruvian rural workers, who won a victory by even getting Castillo elected, right? But now you have the counter reaction, the whip of counter revolution, as Marx would say, as the bourgeoisie and the oligarchs and the imperialists attempt to reassert their power in Peru. Which so far they've been successful in doing, but they've triggered mass uprisings from the people. Peruvians have gotten in the streets. They've protested against this. They are getting more organized. So I believe that you'll see the revolutionary struggle and the Peruvian people and the grassroots organizers solidify and become stronger as a result of this ultimately, even though it's a victory for the oligarchs and for the capitalist class. They've won the battle, but they haven't won the war, of course. So we'll see how the Peruvian working class responds and how they strike the next blow to the ruling class. But yeah, and Peru also has this history. And I'll say this because I've been getting into it with a bunch of Maoist ultras on Twitter lately who are just ridiculous. In Peru, it's very difficult to convince people to embrace socialism, especially people in the rural regions, because of the shining path, right? Because of this group of Maoist Marxists who a lot of Maoists in the West still support and still praise, led by this criminal Gonzalo, who literally tried to enforce Marxism on their interpretation of Marxism and Maoism on the people like a religion, and were killing and massacring the peasants who wouldn't go along with them. And many people think that the CIA gave at least soft support to the Shining Path and to Gonzalo, as they tried to wage this protracted people's war that was literally them just terrorizing the peasants, right? And this is not Marxism. Marxism comes from the people, right? Marxism is not dogmatic. Marxism is not enforcing the theory on the people. Marxism is that the theory comes from the people and from their struggle against the ruling class. So because of that, the Shining Path has literally destroyed the reputation of socialism and communism in Brazil. Destroyed it. Everybody associates socialism and communism with Gonzalo and his band of terrorists, talking about how they were going to help the peasants, but then shooting the peasants and killing them for not going along with their dogmatic interpretation of Marx. So if you're a Westerner and you're still cheering this on, if you're still like, the Shining Path had it figured out. No, they didn't. They've destroyed and made the struggle for socialism in Peru much, 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 much harder, right? You're not showing solidarity with any Peruvians when you do that, when you worship the Shining Path because you think they had the same theory as you. They suck. They were terrorists. Shining Path equals Khmer Rouge. Yes, literally. Very similar groups who were likely backed by the Central Intelligence Agency. Shining Path opposes Russia's SMO. They're a joke. Are they still around? that's sad that they're even still around. I wish the organization was completely dissolved. But yeah, like all these other communist parties around the world are embracing it, and Shining Path says no. And it's the same. They take the same positions as like Maoist ultras in the West, right? A lot of Maoist ultras in the West don't support the SMO either because Russia capitalist. And that's what I mean. Rather than looking at the concrete conditions that brought the special military operation into fruition that allowed it to become a thing, and analyzing those concrete conditions and the different actors like Russia, the Ukraine, and the US, and how they're situated within the global class struggle and within the geopolitical situation, they just simplify it and say, no, Russia's capitalist. They're bad. I hate them. We can't support anything that they ever do, and nothing they could do is good because they're capitalist. And my theory, my book says capitalism bad. Mao said capitalism bad. Don't you care about what Mao said? You people are ridiculous. Marxism is not a religion. The Khmer Rouge were loved by CIA Chomsky. Noam Chomsky liked the Khmer Rouge back in the day? Dang, that's crazy. That's literal anarchist tactics. Yeah, they're not Marxist, dude. They're not. And the higher ups at the Khmer Rouge admitted that. Right? This is one of the things Riggins writes about in his review of Philip Short's book on Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. That they said the higher ups, like Pol Pot's second in command, said the big, thick words of Marx, they were too big for us or too dense for us to read. We didn't read them. There were multiple quotes like that of higher ups next to Pol Pot who, like, admittedly said they weren't studying Marxism or trying to apply Marxism in any way. Shining Path, or what's left of it, supports Ukraine, and that's what they've said on their official magazine on Sol Rojo. Dang. Well, thank you for letting me know that, Battle Cossack, and thank you for all the super chats today. It's like your third one. Really, really appreciate you funding our show here, sponsoring our show. But that's super interesting. Thanks for letting me know that. Like I said, I wish the Shining Path dissolved and their official magazine shuttered. But nope, there's still a strong contingency of Maoists in the U.S. and you can bet they're being softly backed by State Department forces, ruling class forces, I'll say, not necessarily the State Department itself. Hey, my brothers. Hello, David. How are you? Thank you so much for the $5 super chat. Appreciate you being here with us. David is the original Midwestern Marks Patreon. Been with us since the beginning, and he's still here now, still kicking. So it's been quite a journey, David. Thanks for being with us once again, as always. Sol Rojo is their official website. Gotcha. Does Danky Kang fall into this category of ultra Maoist? Because I've seen some pretty good takes from the guy, and he seems to get a lot of unfair criticism from the Patsock crowd. I don't know who that is, actually. Danky Kang. These Twitter names are so funny. A Marxist Twitter, they're probably a Maoist. They have the little red book in their bio, which I'd like their little red book, and I encourage people to read it, but I don't know. I'd have to look through this guy. One person who is like a hardcore Marxist, Leninist Maoist or hardcore Maoist ultra is like, it's like Marxist 777 or something. I don't know. They're the person who made the big long thread about Vaush being a creep, which was a good thread, but that account is super ultra. Plants Fanon is another one. I don't even want to shout out them. Comrade E was a tanky for a few years, but within the last few years, he's gone full MLM. I know. He's gone down a bad path. I've tried talking to him about it on Snapchat, but no good results yet. Wow, this is a interesting super chat. Is this what's MX stand for? Mexico? Trying to figure it out. And either way, thank you so much for the seemingly big super chat. I don't know how much this is in US dollars, but Thank you so much for helping to support our project. Appreciate you so much. I think AMLO's communication style needs more recognition. He spends 3 hours every day taking questions from reporters and YouTubers alike. Nothing is off the table, and he pulls up anything like Rogan. What I mean, that's awesome, and that is such a good point, Samuel. That is such a good point. I mean, AMLO is so popular, and that's got to be one of the reasons why. And what immediately pops into my head, and I don't know if this pops into your heads, but Biden's press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, is the exact opposite of that. The exact opposite of what AMLO does. Answering all questions, responding to YouTubers, answering hard questions, pulling up sources and, things off YouTube or whatever to talk about. That is the opposite of what Karine Jean-Pierre does. Karine Jean-Pierre deflects any criticism, avoids any difficult questions, tries not to call on anybody who she knows is going to ask a difficult question, ignores them for weeks on end if she knows they're going to be tough. And she has the nerve, she has the gall to be so arrogant and condescending about it. Right? Somebody asks her a question and she acts like they're the biggest fucking idiot she's ever heard in her life. Why would you even ask me that? Don't you know that Joe Biden is above criticism? You extremist right-wing conspiracy theorists asking me tough questions about the president of the country. Right? It's disgusting to watch. It's a joke considering, that the U.S. calls itself a democracy. Right, where the people have control of our leaders. And then our leader sends his press secretary out there to deflect any kind of legitimate criticism from the press or from the people. Versus AMLO, socialistic AMLO in Mexico, is sitting there for 3 hours a day, like you said, answering questions from YouTubers and stuff. And having Jamie pull him up videos like he's on the freaking Joe Rogan podcast. It really blows away the sham talking point, the sham claim that we have a democracy in the United States, that our country represents anything like a democracy. How much access do you have to our politicians? How many hours are your politicians are our politicians willing to sit down and listen to your concerns and listen to the problems of the people? They don't care about the people. They act arrogant and condescending when the people criticize anything they're doing, as they literally give away the farm, give away everything to Wall Street and the shareholders and the military-industrial complex, and massacre little children in Palestine and Yemen and Syria and Libya, all around the world. But if you bring that up, if you criticize that, you're the piece of shit, according to Karine Jean-Pierre in the Biden administration. And now and that's why too. And thanks again for the super chat, Samuel. That's why too you have Republicans like Lindsey Graham now calling to invade Mexico. They want to invade Mexico to stop the fentanyl. Meanwhile, they don't give a shit about the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies who we know purposefully dose the country with opioids. Right? They're fine. They get let off scot-free, but we have to invade Mexico because AMLO's actually a democratic and socialistic leader, and because fentanyl's in Mexico. Just insane. That was something Diego Rusarin asked me when I was on his show. Really awesome Spanish-speaking commentator, born in Brazil, based in Mexico. Actually, he speaks Portuguese as well, Portuguese. Pretty awesome guy. But he asked me, what are the odds that the U.S. invades Mexico? Like, low. They'll exhaust every method of overthrowing Lula possible that doesn't involve a direct invasion. And they're highly distracted with Russia and China right now. But I wouldn't put it past them. Mexico's doing a lot of stuff that the U.S. doesn't like, and they're right on our border, right? That puts a big target on their back. That makes them very susceptible. The fact that they're one of the two countries that shares a border with the U.S. And we're not going to invade Canada. Of the two countries bordering the U.S., Mexico has the highest chance of being invaded. That's my analysis. Pretty smart, right? Pants. Nobody invading Mexico. What is this, like cap? Are we saying pants now instead of cap? I remember when I was a senior in college and 2 kids on the wrestling team moved in with me to be my roommate because they didn't have anywhere else to live. And they were freshmen. There was a 4 or 5 year age gap between us. And they just said, you know, they were saying, that's cap, this is cap, no cap, you're capping, bruh. And I was like, what is cap? I had no idea what they meant. And that's when I realized there was already like a cultural divide or an age gap between me and these kids who were 4 years younger. I had already gotten old and I couldn't understand their slang. I'm like a baseball cap? And they're like, yeah, like if you're capping. I'm like, what? Then they explain that it means like lying, like a cap is a lie, you know, and obviously I figured it out. But if we're already switching to pants, if we're saying pants instead of cap, that's too quick of a change. I just figured out how to use cap. I just figured out how to say Lindsey Graham is capping. Ain't nobody invading Mexico. I'm not ready to start saying Lindsey Graham is pantsing. When I was growing up, pantsing meant a different thing. It meant you pulled someone's pants down. Nowadays, you would go to jail for that. It's assault. But I digress. Patsock is a liberal term. Search parenti patriotism. Thank you so much, Justin Watson, for the $2 super chat. Highly appreciate you. As well as Michael Parenti's lecture on super patriotism. I also highly appreciate that. I also highly recommend it. I also am so sick of seeing the word patsock. It is just a liberal buzzword, a way that ultras and liberals can label anybody they don't like on Twitter or whatever. Just call them a patsock. It's very stupid. It's a way to deflect from actual conversation. At the end of his life, and thank you for your 1, 2, 3, 4th super chat of the day, Battle Cossack, carrying the whole team on his back today. Says at the end of his life, Pol Pot turned liberal and demands that Cambodia should open up to the world and introduce free markets. He was an opportunist. I didn't even know that, but there's a little interesting tidbit of history for you that proves that what I was saying is true. Pol Pot was an opportunist who wanted to come to power, and he came to power mostly on the backs of the Khmer people by uniting them in a sort of nationalistic way, more so than a socialistic way. Just calling himself a socialist and a communist because it was popular in the East at the time, in Vietnam, Laos, and China. But then when he thought that becoming a liberal would save him and help him maintain power, he became a neoliberal, which I didn't know, but very interesting and fits with my understanding of Pol Pot and who he was and what he was about. All right, well, we've gotten 10 super chats already. That's pretty freaking sweet. But now, actually, what video should we get into now? Pyongyang vlog, or let's watch Fareed Zakaria on 21st Century Russia. But first, I got to run to the bathroom. I'm not going to make it much longer. So, while I'm doing that, enjoy this vlog about Pyongyang. Because this is one of the videos I wanted to react to today, but it's mostly just a guy showing the subways and stuff. So, enjoy watching this while I go to the bathroom, and then I'll be right back. How was Gromsky appropriated into Eurocom? That's a Carlos question. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for the super chat, but I have never read Gromsky. Carlos has. I mean, I've read him, but not thoroughly. Carlos has. I'm not an expert on Eurocommunism. Thomas Riggins is, and I know Carlos and him have talked about that before. This is just a deep philosophy question that I can't tackle for you. But if you remember that question, and save it for tonight or the next time Carlos and I stream and ask it again, Carlos will give you an hour-long answer that will make me fall asleep. Just kidding. Boom roasted, Carlos. Thank you so much for the super chat, though.
下吧。这是我们的导游，还挺漂亮的，还挺宽敞的。好了，走吧。他们可以上镜吗？好。这是我们的导游妹子。所以这个就是官方说明是可以拍照也可以拍摄的。我们第一站先去哪里呀？我们先去吃饭，大家是不是都饿了？好，我很期待吃什么。
All right. Daddy's back. Daddy's home. I'm sorry I said that. I'll never call myself daddy again. Only morons use the word woke. Well, you just used the word woke. So what does that make you, smarty pants? Sorry. Let's look how clean everything is here. We didn't expect that the streets of this city were so clean. And there's, everywhere there's a great accumulation of wealth in the US, like New York, where they have subways. There's also a great accumulation of poverty and many people who are homeless. And New York is the perfect example. Well, maybe Silicon Valley in California too, but New York is the total perfect example because that's where Wall Street is. That's where the stock exchange is. So that's where bajillions of dollars in wealth are traded and circulated every day and handed out to shareholders in dividends and stock buybacks and giveaways of human labor in the money form. While you have homeless people all around, while you have people paying exorbitant rent costs and, barely enough money in their bank account to get by day. So there's just enormous accumulation of wealth on a global scale. It's the largest concentration of wealth in the entire global capitalist system. And you also have an extreme accumulation of poverty because capitalism never alleviates the contradiction at its core. The fact that wealth is based on exploitation means it's always going to throw people into degradation and poverty. So no matter how much freaking wealth you accumulate, no matter how much wealth you accumulate in a neoliberal capitalist system, you will also accumulate poverty in the same spot. Look at any city in the US. Look at LA. Look at Chicago. Look at New York. You have great wealth, but you also have great poverty and crime. Now look at Pyongyang. Look at Beijing. Look at cities like Urumqi in the Xinjiang region of China. Even in the mountainous and more rural regions. You don't have homeless people. You don't have dirt and grime everywhere. And you have access to public transportation and nice things and walkways. So these socialist countries that are supposedly failing because they're poorer than us or whatever, after building themselves up from agrarian feudal countries while we hold them under stringent sanctions like North Korea, they're apparently failures, even though they've built these cities that look so much better than the American cities. This doesn't look like a failure to me. If you showed somebody a video of the New York subway, like the video I saw the other day of a homeless guy taking a poop in a janitor's mop bucket on New York subway, which is just like a normal occurrence on the subway. I mean, not a totally normal occurrence, but you see that kind of stuff on the subways, what you expect to see. People having mental health crises, people without homes, dirt and grime and feces everywhere, versus what it looks like in Pyongyang, right? And that's not to shame the homeless people on the New York subway. Not to blame the homeless people, of course. It's the system that doesn't take care of them. It's the system that says if you can't pay the exorbitant cost that a landlord charges you for rent, that pays for your housing plus the profit of your landlord, then you go homeless. Then you live on the streets. We're not going to provide you with public housing. That's what the system does to people. And in fact, the people who try and blame individuals, the Ben Shapiros of the world, who say it's just those homeless people's fault for being so lazy, are lying. And they'll never be able to explain why there are systems around the world now where there aren't people sleeping on the streets. But in the U.S. and all the centers of wealth, the places where wealth is concentrated, there are people sleeping on the streets. And of course, they would say, well, that's just because they're a dictatorship. They shoot everybody who sleeps on the streets or whatever, or they throw them in the labor camp. Okay, I guess I can't argue against that. These countries are developing themselves. This is why, and I've said this is why the State Department in the U.S. are cracking down on social media. This is one of the reasons. And this is why they're now criticizing. There's all these articles about North Korean and Chinese vloggers, right? People just walking around with their phone cameras and filming their everyday life in China or the DPRK or wherever. The U.S. is freaking out about it because these countries are becoming more advanced than us, right? They're no longer countries trying to pull themselves out of poverty, trying to pull themselves out of, a deindustrialized or non-industrialized agrarian feudal society. They're now developed modern nations, maybe with not everything that we have in the U.S. There's a ton of things that affect, or a ton of ways that U.S. sanctions affect the DPRK and prevent them from having certain things. But you can tell just from YouTube vlogs that the subways in Pyongyang are nicer than the subways in New York. So the State Department and the ruling class is like, no YouTube vloggers. It's propaganda. They're showing the Americans what other countries are like. No, because that's all it takes anymore, is just showing an American what the Pyongyang subway is like, and every American's gonna be like, that's nicer than New York. It straight up is. Sorry, it's true. That's nicer than Chicago. That pains me because I'm from the Midwest and I love Chicago. But Pyongyang's less dirty and nicer than Chicago. I'd rather go to Pyongyang. I'm sorry. The NK Defector story about kids eating rats that ate people actually inspired one of my funnier jokes. So thanks for that, at least. What's that? I want to hear your joke. I love Yeonmi Park. Well, I don't love Yeonmi Park, but I've done like a 6-hour series or whatever. It was like over 2 hours of analysis of Yeonmi Park and her claims that everyone in North Korea eats rats and then rats eat people. Then the people eat the rats. And it's a cycle of ratting. We'll move on to Fareed Zakaria in a sec here. Actually, we'll move on to Fareed Zakaria right now while we wait for Mouse to send us his joke. But Yeonmi Park's comedy is hard to beat. It is. It is. She was even funnier than Andrew Schulz when she was on his podcast. Actually, I don't know what's funnier, watching Yeonmi Park just say complete nonsense on Joe Rogan and Andrew Schulz podcast, or watching Joe Rogan and Andrew Schulz and these American meathead comedians like, oh, wow, the people eat rats? Wow, North Korea sure is bad. Thanks for coming on my show. What? The rats eat people and then the people eat the rats in a vicious cycle? Wow. That's Joe Rogan talking to Yeonmi Park. And I like Joe Rogan in a lot of ways, but he's like, whoa, that's crazy. Not like, whoa, that seems physically impossible that hospital patients live on a diet of only rats. And Jordan Peterson, too, I don't think she even told the rat story on Joe Rogan, but she said the rat story on Jordan Peterson. That's where she said it. She told Jordan Peterson, who's supposed to be one of our leading public intellectuals, that the people eat rats, the rats eat the people, and it's a cycle like that. And Jordan Peterson's just like, very interesting. I am a serious intellectual who sees no problem with this rat economy. Seems totally plausible. Yeonmi Park's in the house. What's up, Yeonmi? Back and forth forever. It's so sad. All right. Okay, we got another Yeonmi Park. She claimed to push trains on Joe Rogan. That's right, right. She was starving and dehydrated to death, but she pushed a train up a mountain. Kim Jong-un made her do it. It's crazy. The whole country, all of the DPRK is just one big torture chamber. Like, okay. Let's get into Fareed Zakaria, CNN propagandist. One of my least favorite CNN.
In his important book, The Third Wave, Samuel Huntington pointed out that division among the ruling elite.
Who pretends to be one of the good ones, one of the smart ones, but he's not. He's just a somewhat high-level propagandist, or not even really high-level. All he's doing is nitpicking data and nitpicking news stories globally to try and push the CNN narrative, to try and push the neoliberal narrative, whatever narrative is coming down from the neocon-run Democratic Party. Or neolib-run Democratic Party is what Fareed Zakaria is going to push. He's just going to try and make it sound intellectual. But he's not to be trusted. Not to be trusted. The first time he was doing the funniest Fareed Zakaria moment was when Trump was president, and just every day it was anti-Trump coverage. Trump is evil. Trump is a disgrace. Trump has no civility. Trump has no decorum. What a disgrace to our country. Trump took power undemocratically, blah, 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 blah. And then Trump launched missiles at Syria. He launched missile strikes at Bashar al-Assad under the sketchy claims of gas attacks that have since been disproven. That Assad was, or it's been proven Assad was not, or there's no proof that Assad was using chemical gas on his people, which were the justification for these attacks. And Fareed Zakaria does a segment, his very first segment, praising Trump and saying this was the moment where Trump became president, which was a hilarious line. Like, yeah, he wasn't a U.S. president before, but then he launches missiles into Syria, a country that's never attacked us based on lies, and now he's a U.S. president. Now he's officially in the club. Yeah, I see how it works, Fareed. But this guy pretends to be an intellectual, pretends to be a lefty, right? But all he wants is more war. He's nothing but a fancy talking puppet for the military-industrial complex.
In his important book, The Third Wave, Samuel Huntington pointed out that division among the ruling elite is a key sign of weakness in authoritarian regimes. When prominent members of the establishment break with the system, it often triggers a larger set of changes. Conversely, when you do not see such defections, it means the autocrat will probably be able to survive.
They never define these terms either. The U.S.'s enemies are authoritarian regimes. We're liberal democracies. Forget the fact that our country censors anybody critical of the State Department or of the Pentagon, or that they just got caught, the intelligence agencies just got caught controlling Twitter and controlling TikTok in order to push out any kind of critical narrative. We're not autocratic. We're not an authoritarian regime. It's only censorship when Russia does it or when Bashar al-Assad does it.
Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad offers one example.
Hey, right on cue.
Example of this principle at work. So how would we apply that to Russia today? Yevgeny Prigozhin's failed attack has revealed some dissent within Russia's ruling elite, but Vladimir Putin was apparently able to snuff it out within a day or two. It appears that Prigozhin got no public support from any key figure in the Kremlin, which could be why he ended his quixotic march on Moscow. Putin has spent much of his tenure crushing dissent from liberals. Now he's subduing his challengers.
It was never an attack, though. That's the thing. It wasn't an attack. They were going to go to the Kremlin to have words with Putin, or some people believe Prigozhin was going to try and overthrow the government violently, but, there was never any bloodshed. So, and he turned, Lukashenko brokered a peace deal or whatever, got him to turn around right away before anybody was killed. So, it wasn't even an attack. And Yevgeny Prigozhin is not part of the Russian government. He's not part of the Kremlin. He's the leader of the Wagner Professional Mercenary Company. So he's a military leader of a group who tried to make some sort of political power grab when he felt like his back was against the wall. And it was stifled very quickly.
Sent from liberals. Now he's subduing his challengers on the national.
But and that alone doesn't make Russia an autocratic or authoritarian regime, right? Prigozhin, I mean, they pointed this out on the Duran, which is one of my favorite news shows with Alexander Mercouris and Alex Christoforou. For weeks, they were saying that Prigozhin is being extremely critical of the Russian Ministry of Defense. He's being extremely critical of Russian higher-ups and military officers in a way that no military in the world would accept. Right? Any military, whether in the US, UK, France, an African country, Latin American country, whatever, they wouldn't allow somebody to be saying the things that Prigozhin was saying about his military officers without punishment, just openly criticizing the Russian Ministry of Defense. And like I said, Prigozhin is the leader of this mercenary group working together with the Russian military. So there was going to be a conflict that came to a head at some point, right? There was going to be some kind of military discipline on Prigozhin. So he felt like his back was against the wall, and he made a move against Moscow. He made a move against Putin. But that doesn't mean that Russia's an authoritarian, autocratic regime that Putin, is ruling over with an iron fist. Prigozhin was just isolated politically and felt like his back was against the wall, which is why he lashed out in this way and did this.
Nationalist side.
But the CNN narrative has to be so simplistic. Putin's a comic book villain. Prigozhin tried to fight back for the Russian people, but he was smashed by the autocratic Russian regime. The Democratic Biden regime would have let the military just march into Washington, D.C. and seize the White House.
Power struggles within the Russian state take place in a black box. As the lines often attributed to Winston Churchill go, Kremlin political intrigues are comparable to a bulldog fight under a rug. An outsider only hears the growling, and when he sees the bones fly out from beneath, it's obvious who won. For now, it is Prigozhin's bones that we see figuratively, and perhaps soon we shall see them literally.
I don't think that's the worst description of how Russia makes internal political decisions, even in the time Churchill was alive, in the time of the Soviet Union. Right? They're not just doing things with an open door policy and complete transparency. But of course, the U.S. doesn't either. And of course, they keep us fighting. The news keeps us fighting about things that don't matter, about culture war issues, social issues, hot button topics like that, while they make all the foreign policy decisions in backdoor meetings. Right? They make all the important decisions in terms of governance and foreign policy and things like that in private, and then try and lie to give justification for whatever it is they're doing.
What is not a matter of speculation is the state of Russian society. I've been stunned by one statistic ever since I read it. A 15-year-old Russian male today has the same life expectancy as a 15-year-old male in Haiti. Remember, Russia is one of the world's richest countries in terms of natural resources, and it is an urbanized, industrialized society with...
Not really since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So this is what Fareed's going to do. He's going to point out how Russia's got high poverty statistics to try and make them seem like a failing autocratic regime or whatever. When we know that the collapse of the Soviet Union allowed Russia's economy to be plundered by Western multinationals, underwent a process of deindustrialization that was an absolute human rights and economic disaster. Thousands and thousands of people died from malnutrition, unemployment shot through the roof, drug abuse shot through the roof, and drugs flowed over the border for the first time in years, as did prostitution. And the country was plundered by Western multinationals. They went from this industrial powerhouse to a somewhat, semi-deindustrialized nation in a deep, deep, deep economic crisis. And why Putin has so much popularity is because he said we're going to have a pro-Russian economy, right? We're going to enact nationalistic, pro-Russian economic policies. We still have oligarchs, but we're going to force the oligarchs to invest in Russia, particularly, and this will relate to something Fareed says later, particularly in Russian energy, right? Oil, natural gas. If we can control our raw materials, if we can control our energy supply, we can control our economy and become much more prosperous and become much richer, kind of taking a page out of China's book or the Soviet Union's book, with more central economic planning designed to boost and strengthen the Russian economy. So that's made Putin very popular, but the poverty and deindustrialization Fareed's talking about happened because of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Western finance capitalists who plundered Russia's economy. Also, thanks so much, Battle Cossack, for another super chat. And agree, the coup attempt had the opposite effect. It made Putin and Lukashenko more popular, as have the pro-working class, pro-Russian or Belarusian economic reforms that I was just talking about.
Levels of education and literacy comparable to and perhaps even exceeding European countries.
They were also extremely high. Literacy and education rates, collapse of the Soviet Union, tanked. But socialism doesn't work, right? Capitalism's the only system that works, right? Unless you look at all of the relevant statistics.
This analysis comes from an August 2022 working paper by the scholar Nicholas Eberstein.
From the American Enterprise Institute. That is the best name for a pro-corporate, pro-Western finance capital think tank or NGO I've ever heard of.
Who has long studied demography. He points out that for 3 decades now, Russia has been depopulating. With a brief respite from 2013 to 15.
For 3 decades! They're basically saying the quiet part out loud. What happened in 1991, Fareed? Why aren't you talking about what happened there? Why aren't you talking about the fact that the socialist economic system and government collapsed and their economy was taken over by Western capitalists? Why aren't you explaining that, Fareed? Seems like kind of a relevant part of the data points you're breaking down here. Are you just cherry picking?
Deaths have outpaced births. But he notes that this trend is one that we see in many industrialized countries. What stands out in Russia is its mortality rate. Using the World Health Organization's data in 2019, before any effects from COVID or the war, the World Health Organization estimated a 15-year-old boy in Russia could expect to live another 53.7 years, which is about the same as a Haitian and below the life expectancy.
Fareed's take, the stunning decay of Russian society, all because of Putin, all because of this oligarch. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. The collapse of the Soviet Union led to this economic decay. Everybody in Russia knows that. That's why the Soviet Union is, or 70% of Russians say they wish the Soviet Union never fell now. And why there's such a positive view of Stalin in Russia now. And Putin came in and said, you know, I'm not a socialist, I'm not a Marxist, I'm not a communist, but we need to enact nationalistic Russian or pro-Russian economic policies, like I said, and try and rebuild Russia. And that's what they've started to do, which is why the West is now making it a priority to destroy Russia, right? But Fareed's just trying to say Russia's economy is decaying because authoritarianism or something. It's the most simple-minded, stupid, disconnected from reality take or analysis. It's just pure propaganda.
For males in Yemen, Mali, South Sudan, European males of around the same age could expect to live about 7 years longer than Russians. Education usually correlates with good health, but not in Russia. Eberstadt points out that shockingly, Russia is a country with first world educational levels and fourth world mortality rates for its working age population. He then digs deeper into the educational attainments and finds that the mystery deepens. With huge numbers of well-trained people, especially in the sciences, Russia performs miserably in the knowledge economy.
All right, Russia performs miserably in the knowledge economy, he says. Now, I want you to pay attention to what he means by that and the data points that he uses to try and show that Russia is performing poorly economically. Like I said, Putin has been heavily investing in Russian energy, trying to build up Russian natural gas, Russian oil, things like that, because if you control the energy source, you can, help your economy flourish and control really the base of your economy because all economic activity is driven by energy. And how do we know that the U.S. cares about this? Because they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which is how Russia trades energy with Europe, right? So they're concerned about this sort of socialistic control that Russia's taking over their energy sector to try and reindustrialize and rebuild their economy, making them a world superpower in terms of economics and politics again. But Fareed saying, no, they're just decaying. They've been decaying for 30 years. There's no Putin rebuilding Russia. There's no reinvestment in Russia brought about by Putin. Look at how poorly they're performing in the knowledge economy.
Much worse than did the Soviet Union. In 2019, Russia ranked behind Austria in international patent applications.
Because they don't have as many international patents. They don't use intellectual property laws the same way that Western finance capitalists do, who only founded the World Trade Organization so they could enforce patent laws all around the globe and use them to gain a competitive advantage like they did during COVID. They used intellectual property laws. They used patents to stop other countries from either importing or making the vaccine themselves. They said, no, we own the recipe to this vaccine. We know it's a global pandemic. You can't have it, though. We need to make money. And that was enforced by the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization, which were institutions created and that have always been propped up by Western finance capital so they can use patents to gain an advantage in the market. But because Russia doesn't have as many of these, we're supposed to assume that they're just not producing anything, that their economy is tanking and decaying because they don't have as many patents as us. When the monopoly on patents has been, or when Western finance capitalists purposefully maintain a monopoly on patents to gain a competitive advantage over countries like Russia. But Fareed doesn't even mention that.
Despite having 16 times the population. Today, it ranks alongside Alabama in U.S. patents, the gold standard for companies everywhere.
The U.S. patent is the gold standard for companies everywhere. And like I said, they purposefully maintain a monopoly on those patents. And what he's basically admitting here is that the global patent system is controlled by the U.S. It's controlled by the Western finance capitalists, and they utilize those patents nefariously to, like I said, stop competitors or competitive countries from producing their own stuff. And the World Trade Organization and these global organizations were created to enforce these intellectual property laws globally and outsource U.S. patent laws to the rest of the world, so we prevent the rest of the world from developing, and we can hog all of the intellectual property and all of the knowledge and the information for making things like vaccines, right? But that's Russia's fault. That's not Western finance capitalists purposefully weaponizing and monopolizing patents to make more profit and outcompete other countries. It's because Russia's decaying. If they had more, if they had a monopoly on medical patents and patents for insulin and medicine, the way U.S. pharmaceutical companies have, then they'd have a good economy, an economy that takes care of their people. Like, no, these patents aren't even good for us. These patents screw us over. Pharmaceutical companies use patents every single day and buy up as many patents as they can to stop cheaper alternative drugs from being made that would save people's lives, because they only want to push expensive drugs that will make them a lot of profit in the market.
The gold standard.
But patents, the more patents you have, the better your economy's doing, says the fucking genius Fareed Zakaria. And this is why he gets paid the big bucks by CNN, baby, for genius graphs like this.
For companies everywhere, despite having almost 30 times the population of Alabama. All these numbers will likely get much worse, given the hundreds of thousands of likely well-trained, urban, educated Russians who fled the country after its aggression against Ukraine. What explains this stunning mismatch in Russia? A new book by the scholar Alexander Etkind, Russia Against Modernity, makes the case that Putin has created a parasitic state that gets revenues by extracting natural resources rather than any creative production.
Putin has created a parasitic state that creates wealth by extracting natural resources, not any kind of creative intellectual production. So do you get what he's doing there? As I said, Russia is reindustrializing. They're investing in their real economy, their energy sector, their real productive economy, their extractive industries. Whereas the U.S. is dominated by pharmaceutical companies and companies using intellectual patent and technology companies. And you know what Fareed here is calling the knowledge-based economy. So he's saying that because Russia doesn't have as many pharmaceutical patents as us or whatever, that they're not producing anything creative the same way that Pfizer and the pharmaceutical companies in the West are. They're just investing in extracting natural resources. What a bunch of idiots. What a bunch of backwards idiots. Don't they know you can run an entire economy just with pharmaceutical companies and medicine? Why are they extracting things out of the ground? Idiot Russians. Like, this is so stupid. This is so stupid. He's saying that because Russia doesn't have the obsession with fictitious capital, knowledge economy capital, like we do, and they don't have the obsession with buying up patents so that you can use them to gain a competitive advantage that Western pharmaceutical companies have, that they have a crumbling and decaying economy. And he has the nerve or the stupidity to say, and they're investing in natural resource extraction, not producing anything creative. Natural resource extraction is the base of any economy. How do you have trade and exchange without natural resources, right? How do you create medicine? How do you create pharmaceutical products without natural resources? How do you create computers that are used to create technology and all the Silicon Valley capital, the way that the Silicon Valley oligarchs make their profit? Yeah, a lot of it's online, a lot of it's digital, but natural resources are still the base of that. And that's what Russia's investing in. That's what China's been investing in. Read Michael Hudson's essay, China's Industrial Socialism versus Western Financialization, which is the state that our economy is in, which is actually the economy in decay, not Russia and China's. But yeah, the fact that we control all the patents and the knowledge economy doesn't mean that Russia's economy is decaying and ours is thriving. In fact, it's quite the opposite, Fareed. You've literally managed to get to the exact opposite of what your conclusion should be. That Russia and China are building by investing in industry, investing in natural resource extraction, and our society is crumbling because we're run by a bunch of pharmaceutical companies, landlords, and bankers, and Silicon Valley people like Mark Zuckerberg.
And which fulfills
who are having a crisis of profit and aren't able to bring in enough profit anymore, so they're finding all these ways to nickel and dime us and lay off workers and drive their wages down. Whereas in Russia, they're adding jobs. They're investing in their industry and putting people back to work in those industries.
none of the functions of a modern state in terms of providing welfare for its people. Corruption is intrinsic to this kleptocratic regime, Atkins says, noting that post-Soviet Russia has seen the fastest rise in inequality anywhere in the world. After the protests against him in 2011 and 2012, which an enraged Putin blamed on then...
He just conflates what happened at the fall of the Soviet Union with Putin, right? When exactly did Putin come to power? He says there was an economic collapse after the fall of the Soviet Union, and then goes right into something about Putin. Putin was inaugurated in 2000. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and the economy was being plundered even a little bit before that. So the human rights disaster, the deindustrialization and destruction of the Russian economy happened 10 years before Putin took power, right? And Putin was able to take power, and he has so much popularity because he's pursued a more nationalistic economic policy, a more populist economic policy, not just total deregulation and liberalization, handing over Russia's economy to Western multinationals. But he conflates the fall of the USSR with the rise of Putin. It's all the same thing. You know, there's no progression over those 30 years. Everything that happened in 1991 should be laid at the feet of Vladimir Putin, according to Fareed Zakaria.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, the Russian state became even more anti-modern. You see, for Putin's regime, the West now represents forces of social, economic, and political modernization that could infect Russia. In his speech as he launched the war in Ukraine...
No, they represent financialization and imperialism. And, you know, there are a lot of cultural values and political values that we have in the West who Russia also sees themselves as being opposed to, right? But they don't see us as like a modern civilized economy, and they're a backwards economy, and that's why they want to destroy us, right? They just want to keep industrializing, keep building themselves up, and trading with China, trading with Iran, trading with Venezuela, doing what they're doing. And the U.S. keeps trying to stop it. The U.S. keeps doing things like blowing up Nord Stream, sabotaging Russia's energy investment, expanding NATO right up to their borders, trying to install a puppet regime in Kiev that they can use to launch attacks into Russia through Ukraine.
Putin accused
It's really the U.S. who sees Russia as an advancing, as a modernizing, as a civilized, or as an advancing civilization. And that's why we want to destroy it. We want to undercut it at the root. We want to stop Russia's economic advancement, their advancement in production. And they're desperate to do it. And this is why at the 2017 summit that NATO had, they said Russia and China are their number one enemies and targets going forward. I had something else I wanted to say, but oh yeah, and it's the imperialists always project, right? They always end up in this place of projection, like where Fareed Zakaria is at. Like Russia's attacking us because they view us as a modernizing society, an advancing society economically and politically, and they're just so backwards. When it's the opposite, it's the U.S. attacking Russia because they're advancing economically. And look at who's got troops where. Russia doesn't have troops in Canada. Russia doesn't have troops in Mexico. Russia's not expanding a military alliance up to the U.S.'s border so they can place a bunch of bases on the border. The U.S. is doing that to Russia. The U.S. has expanded NATO closer to their borders every year since the 1990s, even though they promised not to. Even though they said that NATO was only to contain the Soviet Union, but then kept expanding it after the Soviet Union collapsed and destroyed Yugoslavia to do so, where in Kosovo there are now more NATO troops stationed than any other place on earth. It's basically a NATO base of a country. It's not even really a real country, but I hope I'm allowed to say that. I hope that doesn't get me banned. But it's NATO who's been expanding up to Russia's borders and trying to destroy Russia's civilization, not the other way around.
the United States of seeking to destroy Russia's traditional values and impose new ones on it, which, quote, directly lead to degradation and degeneration because they are contrary to human nature. For Putin, modernizing Russia would create a more active civil society with greater demands for better healthcare, more opportunities for ordinary citizens, and a less kleptocratic state. And so he advocates a traditional Russia, which celebrates religion, traditional morality, xenophobia, and strict gender conformity, of course. What does this all add up to?
Woke imperialism. How dare he? How dare they have different gender and cultural values than us? I sure want to invade them for the sake of the LGBTQ community, just like we supported extremist terrorists and armed extremist jihadi terrorists in Syria and Libya for gender rights, for cultural rights, because that's what jihadi terrorists stand for.
I am not sure, but it is fair to say that Russia's biggest problem is not that it is losing the Ukraine war, but rather that it is losing the 21st century.
Such projection. That's literally what the U.S. is worried about.
Tonight, and
they're worried about Russia and China winning the 21st century, which they are. They're on that track right now if we allow their economies to continue expanding at this rate, and if we allow them to continue growing as political superpowers. So the U.S. is lashing out, increasing sanctions on China, surrounding the South China Sea with our Navy, trying to get Australia to cut off trade with China and launch attacks into China, even though 50% of their trade goes to China. And they're trying to get Europe to do the same to Russia, even though about 50% of at least Germany's energy was coming from Russia before the special military operation happened. They're asking their allies to pull out all the stops and give everything they can in terms of military and political support to destroying Russia and China, because they see them as rising economic and political powers in the 21st century. They see this rising tide of what we're calling multipolarity, where Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, Russia, China, Syria, all these countries, Brazil, Lula's Brazil is also in the Belt and Road Initiative, are coming together to trade, develop each other, and build themselves up, build up industrially, economically, politically. And the U.S. is lashing out because they've been the top dog since the end of World War II. And they want to maintain that spot. They want to maintain imperialist, capitalist hegemony. And that's becoming harder and harder and harder because of the growth of Russia and China. So we want to destroy them so we can continue to rule the 21st century. We've ruled for the last 70, 80 years. We want to rule for the next 100. And Russia and China are threatening that. So the U.S. military, the U.S. empire is lashing out as it decays and collapses from within. As the popularity of socialism and communism grow from within because the economic conditions are deteriorating and getting so bad for the working masses in these countries. But then Fareed Zakaria is going to get on CNN and say, no, Russia's the one who's decaying. They're the ones who are collapsing and they want to destroy us because we're so good. Oh, yeah, well, why doesn't Russia have military bases in Mexico then, Fareed? Why are we training NATO troops in Ukraine, but there are no Russian troops training in Canada? Because we're the empire, and we're the ones attacking them for their economic development. You fool. You puppet. New background, you bet. New house, new me. He is relatively less talking to people in chat, it seems. Yeah, sorry. I like to interact with the chat a lot, but I like to do these segments sometimes without really interacting with the chat unless it's related to what I'm talking about in the segment, because I'll cut that into a YouTube clip and then upload it to YouTube. So I just want to stay focused and not get sidetracked talking to chat. But yeah, oftentimes I do interact with the chat. Will the U.S. media ever call itself a failed state? Yeah, or a state sponsor of terrorism, right? That's another one the U.S. loves to use. But we're not a state sponsor of terrorism, even though we backed and armed and funded the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, helped create Al-Qaeda in Iraq, armed Jaish al-Islam and other jihadi terrorist groups in Syria. Same thing in Libya, helped arm and fund the warlords who are still fighting for power in the power vacuum that was created by the overthrow of Gaddafi. But we're not state sponsors of terrorism. It's Cuba, because they're training up all those doctors, those doctor terrorists. Projection. It's all projection. I'm new here, so I don't know. Sorry. No worries. We're glad to have you, comrade. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, hopefully if you have any questions, I'll be able to get to them. Yeah. Let him cook. Chat has separation anxiety. True. I'm sorry, y'all. What happens when our stream gets too big? What happens when the show gets too big and I can't see the chat because it's going too fast? We're gonna have to have like a subscriber only chat or something, or a follower only chat. Because I can't keep up with all that. Like Hassan, even when I was on Vouch debating him, I'm like, oh my gosh, his chat is just like Eddie's a piece of shit, Eddie's a piece of shit, Eddie's a piece of shit. Fake news, U.S. media are traitors and enemies of the people. They belong in prison. Yeah, people like Fareed. China builds a base in Mexico. Best believe the U.S. would invade so fast. So fast. So fast. They'd be like, we need to launch a special military operation. And then all the tankies would be like, see? They're doing the same thing Russia did. Except the U.S. would probably topple the Mexican government and have no exit plan and be way more ruthless and then plunder Mexico's resources afterwards. Hassan has superpowers with reading chat. Pretty sure he has a dedicated monitor to Chatterino. Oh. What's Chatterino do? Is that like a bot or something? Chat client for Twitch. It aims to be an improved, extended version of Twitch web chat. Okay. I figured it was something like that. That'd be smart. That'd be smart. I'm going to get a third monitor at some point. I don't know what I need it for, but we'll just get it. We'll just get it so we feel like we're in the future. I don't know. Eddie, where do you buy your books? Thank you so much for the $2 super chat, Popsatch. Really appreciate you supporting the stream, supporting me and Carlos and Noah in our quest to stay alive and fuel the revolution. A lot of them on international publishers. A lot of them you get on Marxist.org for free, obviously, but I like hard copies. So I try to use international publishers. Obviously, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. So I don't judge anybody for using Amazon. A lot of them are, cheap. When I do use Amazon, I never do it's more expensive anyways, but I'll never do the same day delivery or anything because I know their workers are super rushed running around. And that's the one really crappy part about buying from Amazon. But as Carlos says, the bigger Amazon is, the more successful or the more useful it will be when we nationalize it under socialism, when we make it the people's Amazon, which is a pretty funny joke. But yeah, buy them from wherever you can get them cheap, but international publishers is good. Midwestern Marx, obviously, we have our books, and we want to do something where we start selling the classics, where we make classic books available on Midwestern Marx, because so many people ask us for recommendations. Where do we get books? And we steer them towards international publishers, right? But it would be really, really nice if we could just send you guys a link and be like, Midwestern Marx has all those books available. But we do have a library, right? We do have a library on our website where you can see a lot of free ebooks, a lot of free PDFs, history books, theory books, philosophy, stuff like that, and links to places where you can buy the hard copies. So check out the Midwestern Marx library if you're at a loss. Other than that, international publishers is the best recommendation I got. Thank you so much for the $2 super chat, Pop Satch. Doesn't Van Jones argue that we should fight Russia for its perceived influence attempts in America? Probably. Oh my gosh. Probably. Is there a better example of liberal galaxy brain than that? Right? That he thinks because of Russiagate, this conspiracy theory that Rachel Maddow and other Democrats and Hillary Clinton pulled out of their ass in the Steele dossier, that was just a complete fraud, a fake, and all these baseless accusations against Russia and against Trump, claiming that Russia was influencing the election and Trump was a puppet of Russia. Right? No basis for it in reality, no evidence for it. It's been deconstructed and blown apart by every respectable journalist in the game. But Van Jones thinks we should fight a war with another nuclear power because of Russiagate, because Russia's influencing our elections. Like, dude. And do we need to pull up that list of U.S. intervention since World War II? Like, we're going to fight a war with Russia because they were putting out some Facebook memes that made Hillary Clinton look bad and influencing the election, when the U.S. has influenced this many elections or overthrown this many countries' governments since World War II. Like, come on, Van. Come on. By your own logic, pretty much every country on earth should be at war with the U.S. right now. If not every country on earth, literally. Van Jones is a neoliberal. Absolutely. All right, y'all. This has been a great stream. We made it 2 hours. I'm sweating. It's hot. My computer's on fire. It needs a nap. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Make sure to donate to join our Patreon or donate to the PayPal for the Buy Eddie an iPad initiative that we're launching. We're actually going to do a fundraiser soon where we can really hopefully raise some money for me to get an iPad. But and we'll be auctioning cool stuff off, and we'll be doing like a 10-hour stream where we take calls and do an auction and do different segments and try and raise money for the Institute. It should be awesome. But my phone's really on its last legs. The back cracked the other day and it gets really hot and dies right away all the time. And I never, ever, ever have any storage on my phone. So I need a phone for like work, for Midwestern Marx and communication and just everyday phone stuff, and like an iPad to film the TikToks, like just an iPad for video editing and TikTok filming. So that's something we want to work towards here in the future. So all of your super chats, Patreon support, direct donations to the PayPal go towards funding our show, keeping me and Carlos alive, like I said, but also getting an iPad so I can be way more active on TikTok, educate all these kids on TikTok, grow Midwestern Marx, which TikTok is such a great tool for doing. without blowing up my phone, without having my phone implode like the Ocean Gate submarine. So there's a direct donation link to our PayPal on MidwesternMarks.com. All that PayPal money, like I said, will be saved for the iPad fund. If not, appreciate your super chats and Patreon support. And if you can't give to us financially, we still love you. We still want you here. We still appreciate you for being around. You can always like the stream or leave a comment or leave a share, and that helps boost us. We appreciate that just as much. So yeah, much love to everyone who hung out with us in the chat today. Thank you to all our moderators like Ware Pilgrim, Cobra Commander, Jacob. Appreciate you all for being here today. I also forgot the name of the book you mentioned about discipline. Was it Discipline Equals Freedom by Jocko Willink? Because that's a book that it's by a right winger, by a former military guy, but it makes an analysis of the dialectic between freedom and discipline, right? Like the more disciplined you are, the more in control of your body and mind you are, and what you put into your body as far as nutrition, the more, and the kind of stuff you consume with your brain, the kind of stuff you read and watch, that affects how much freedom you actually have, how much freedom you have to do the stuff that you want and achieve things that you want. So that might be what I was talking about. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat. Thank you so much, Sebastian, consistent donor of the show. I'll put this $4 right towards the Eddie Liger iPad fund. Appreciate you so much. And thank you all for hanging out with us today. Much love. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Hopefully I'll be back on with Carlos later tonight. So stay tuned for that. Till then, solidarity forever.